It's been 3 years since Microsoft released the Surface 3, its last small and cheap tablet. But now there's the Surface Go. It's $399, and while it's not as powerful as the rest of the Surface line, it's a smart attempt at creating a tablet that can also be used as a secondary PC. You won't really notice much of a difference just looking at the Surface Go, but when you hold it, you'll see that it's much smaller than anything we've had before. It has a smaller screen than the Surface 3, which had a 10.8-inch display. This one just has a 10-inch screen. That change is all about portability. It's about a quarter-pound lighter than the Surface 3, and only a tad heavier than the iPad. So really, this is the Surface for Microsoft that actually feels like a genuine tablet, and not just a PC that's kind of shrunken down. As you'd expect, the Surface hinges back, and now it can also articulate all the way down to 165 degrees. The Surface 3 only had 3 stops, so that makes it just a lot more flexible than before. Microsoft also included a USB-C port instead of the standard USB slot, and you can also use that for charging, but of course there's the traditional Surface charger as well. The key to the Surface Go is that it's just very light and portable. You can slip it in your bag and forget about it most of the day. That makes it a better tablet than any other Surface, but of course there's the type cover. You could just slap that on and have a traditional keyboard and touchpad to use it as a typical laptop. Unfortunately, the type cover is still sold separately. That's $99 for the traditional one, and there's also a slightly more premium Alcantara version that's $129. Microsoft had to redesign the type cover because this is a much smaller machine than any other Surface, so the keys are a little more cramped than what we're used to, but they still feel really good to type on. There's a decent amount of travel, and the touchpad is very large and honestly feels better than most laptop touchpads I've seen. And since this is a Surface, there's of course 10-finger multi-touch support, as well as support for Microsoft's Pen, which works just as well as it does on the Surface Laptop and Surface Pro. So if you have artistic inclinations, then this may be a better option for you than something like the iPad. The Surface Go has a lot going for it conceptually. It kind of straddles the line between tablet and PC more so than any other Surface, but the hardware might hold it back for some serious PC work. It has a Pentium Gold CPU, which isn't very powerful, but Microsoft says it's about 30% faster than the Atom chip that was inside the Surface 3. But basically, you'll have to be very careful about what you're running. You wouldn't want to overload this computer by multitasking way too much. Based on my testing, it handled my typical workflow just fine, which involves a lot of browser tabs, Evernote, Spotify, Slack, all running at once. But I did notice some slowdown when I was loading some web pages that have embedded videos, and honestly anything that stresses this computer a little will spike the CPU all the way up to 100%, and everything will slow down a bit. So basically you'll have to go into the Surface Go with the expectation that the hardware is a little limited. It's kind of like using a computer from 5 or 10 years ago. You just would be very careful about what you're actually running. As a tablet, it's useful, but it's kind of limited by Windows 10, which doesn't have many great tablet apps. Still, in tablet mode, it was useful for browsing the web, using Netflix, and things like that. The Surface Go ships with Windows 10 S, which is the limited mode that only runs apps from the Windows Store, but you can also just head right to the store and switch it over to Windows 10 Home if you really need that. I honestly did that a few hours after I started testing it because that's the way I typically use a PC. But the Windows Store is getting better, so more and more of your work could be done without involving third-party apps outside the store. The base $399 model has 4 GB of RAM and 64 GB of eMMC storage. That's not super impressive when it comes to PCs, but for a tablet, it's not that bad. The version we tested is the $549 model, which has 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of SSD storage. That's honestly the model I'd recommend, just because you'll use up that RAM very quickly. If you want to do a lot of work with this computer, that's probably the configuration you want to go for. Still, it's very nice that Microsoft was able to get a model out there for $399. Just remember, all the accessories are sold separately, so the keyboard, the pen, those will all add on to the cost. Ultimately, the Surface Go isn't an iPad killer, but it's a really intriguing alternative, especially if you're used to the Windows ecosystem and you don't like any of those iPad keyboards. It'll let you run most of the PC apps that you're used to. You'll just have to be aware of its limitations. Check out our full review at Engadget.com, and we'll be doing a review video in a couple days.